With the release of the new 3.4 CFUS update and the new DLC, Stellaris Overlord, we get a lot of new content. One part of this content is holdings, buildings which can be negotiated in vassal contracts up to a maximum of 4. Holdings do a wide variety of things, and because of that, some holdings end up inevitably being better than others. So let's take a look at what the better holdings look like, as well as the worst. A few things to keep in mind are that you can't stack the same type of holdings on the same planet. What this basically means is that you can't have 2 Overlord garrisons on the same planet, or 2 aid agencies, or 2 organic havens. Furthermore, the effects of most holdings are local and apply only to the planet which it has been built on. While this is usually obvious, this is just to clear up any confusion about perhaps holdings giving global effects. If there are any global effects which a holding provides, they will be specifically mentioned. Lastly, all holdings have a base loyalty cost. The first 2 holding slots cost 0.4 loyalty per month and 0.6 loyalty per month, which is generally quite negligible. However, the 3rd and 4th slots cost 1 entire loyalty per month and 2 loyalty per month, which is quite significant and something you should keep in mind. Starting off at the bottom in the F tier, these holdings are either entirely outclassed by other holdings or simply don't make up for the opportunity cost of using a holding slot. The first holding in the F tier, which we will discuss, is the Overlord Foundry. The only requirement to building the Overlord Foundry is that the subject must be specialized into a prospectorium. Now, what the Overlord Foundry basically does is it makes metallurgist jobs for you, which consumes the subject's minerals and provides you, the Overlord, with alloys. But alloys are incredibly valuable and precious, so why would such a holding be down so low in the F tier? Well, there's a few reasons, and to start it off, it has a massive negative loyalty modifier of minus 1.5 loyalty per month. Now, this by itself wouldn't be an issue if you maintain good relations with a vassal. 1.5 monthly loyalty is easy to come by, but that isn't it by itself. It should also be noted that the job is not affected by the upgraded alloy plants like the alloy mega forges and the alloy nano forges, meaning that it will only produce its base 3 alloys or base 4 alloys if the subject is a machine in intelligence before adding the modifiers to the production. Whether or not this is an oversight by Paradox or simply them believing it would be too powerful if it was affected by the alloy mega forges and nano forges, I'm not sure, but it isn't effective, which greatly reduces its viability in competitive play. And the final nail in the coffin for this holding is the fact that it is simply outclassed by another holding which we will discuss later, the Ministry of Extraction. To summarize, the Off-Road Foundry suffers from not having increased production by upgraded alloy forges, a massive negative loyalty malus, and simply not producing enough alloys to be seen as viable compared to its competition. Next up, we have the Noble Chateaus. The effect of this holding is reducing the subject's amenities to create stability for the capital. It has some cool thematics revolving around having the trashy nobles spend their time here in the holding instead of the home nation to reduce instability in the capital, which has some very nice RP potential, but in terms of power, it isn't very useful and it isn't very powerful. The holding has a minus 1 loyalty effect, which isn't a big deal because to build the holding, you must have the feudal empire civic, which provides plus 1 loyalty, effectively negating the effect if you have one of these holdings per vassal. The real issue is that it provides only 2% stability for the capital, which is a meager production bonus, and your capital isn't really hurting for stability either. In most games, your capital is going to be at least above 50% stability, which is really what you mostly care about when you're looking at stability. And adding 2% will only add about 1 to 2% production for everything on the capital planet, which is nice, but it isn't really that powerful for a holding. Finishing the F tier, we have the distributed processing holding. Now, what does this holding do? Well, it provides 4 mind thralls jobs, which produce a base of 1.5 research in all categories. Now, as great as research is, this meager quantity of research means that this holding produces a total of 1.5 base researcher output. But that's not all, ladies and gentlemen. What makes it even worse is the fact that this holding has a -2 loyalty malice, which is very significant. There are few other holdings which do this, and it's as expensive as getting the 4th holding slot. But similarly to the Overlord Foundry, this holding is simply outclassed by another holding which is able to be built by non-machine intelligence empires. As to build this holding, you must be a machine intelligence. But machine intelligence or not, you're simply better off building another holding which we will discuss later, called the satellite campus. The only possible advantage this holding could have over the satellite campus is the fact that the mind thrall's job is a worker class job rather than a specialist job which the satellite campus provides. And so worker jobs have an easier time getting bonus production modifiers. However, I don't think this is worth the extra -2 loyalty you receive from this holding. Moving on from the F tier, we have the C tier. Now in the C tier, we have holdings which have uses, but generally these uses are situational, and so you will generally not be using these holdings very often outside of RP or in said specific situations. Now, what do we have here in the C tier? Well, we have a lot, so let's start off with the Dread Outpost. Now, to build the Dread Outpost, you must have the Reanimator Civic, and the subject must not be a machine intelligence or have the Reanimator Civic themselves. But what does the Dread Outpost do? Well, it provides 2 Overlord Necromancer jobs. These jobs provide a base of 6 research in physics and society. This is much more research than the Mind Thrall's job from before. So why is it down so low in the C tier? It's because there's no engineering research produced or generated here. Engineering research is one of the more important research, if not the most important research section, due to the fact that it has the most useful technologies, like mega engineering, destroyers, battleships, and all of that good stuff. But generated research isn't the only thing that this holding does. It also produces defense armies and turns defense armies on the planet into undead armies, which have some very cool potential in a cooperative game where you can help a vassal fortify their worlds without them needing to be reanimators themselves. However, this is a very niche use in and of itself, as generally speaking, you don't really need armies to do much of anything. Now, keeping with the undead theme, we have the Re-Employment Center, which requires being a mechacorp with the permanent employment civic, as well as the subject not being a machine intelligence. It has no loyalty modifiers unless the subject is egalitarian, in which case it has a -0.5 loyalty modifier. It provides 1 Overlord reassigner jobs, which will provide a zombie pop every 5 years via an event, meaning it does not consume any pop assembly slot, which makes it quite nice for giving pops to your vassal, and quite consistent. However, you don't directly gain anything from it, and so it's down here in the C tier, because while pops are very valuable, and if you like to help your vassal, say you're in multiplayer and you want to help out a friend, giving them a few extra pops, it is nice. However, it is still a pretty niche usage if you are looking for purely your own benefit as the Overlord. Next, we have the Offspring Nest, which provides 1 Offspring Drone Feeder. To build this holding, you must be a progenitor hive. Now, what does it do? It provides 8 society research for the Overlord, and plus 5% worker pop output for the subject. This worker pop output increase is very nice and useful as the subject and for the subject. However, for the Overlord, it generally isn't all that important, especially if your vassals are AI with higher difficulty modifiers, as they get production modifiers that are much higher than the 5% and will completely eclipse its effectiveness. So if you're going for a co-op style of game with overlords and vassals and multiplayer, it has some very nice usefulness. However, it does not really help the overlord. So if you're playing a single player game with you as the overlord and the AI as your vassals, I do not recommend you build this holding, as +8 society research is both negligible and kind of useless, as no one really needs that extra society research. Following that, we have the experimental crater. To make this holding, you must be a lithoid empire with the calamitous birth origin. Now, what does this holding do? It makes 3 mining jobs, provides 8 engineering research for the overlord, and 4 physics research. It must be noted that the research is not produced by jobs, which means that it does not scale with pop output increases at all. But of course, this isn't the only thing that the holding does. It also has the chance of adding 30 devastation to the planet every 2 to 4 years, with a 20% chance of making a buried lithoid blocker. So this holding can make pops, which is nice. But there's only a 20% chance of making a lithoid pop every 2 to 4 years, which isn't really all that great. And it's even worse because it's something only the subject gains, and you, the overlord, don't really gain the pop from the buried lithoid blocker. So as the subject, you have to suffer from the 30% devastation every now and then, and as the overlord, you gain like 8 engineering research and 4 physics research, which is the more useful kind of research, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't increase with any pop output modifiers, and that amount of research isn't really useful beyond maybe the very early game, in which case you generally won't have any vassals in the first place. Of course, the 3 mining jobs is useful if you have the Ministry of Extraction on the planet, but then the power is mostly coming from the Ministry of Extraction rather than the experimental crater. And lastly, it has a -1 loyalty penalty, which is troublesome if you're asking a lot of the subject or your subject taxes are quite high. After that, we have the communal housing outreach. To build this holding, you must have the shared burden civic, and the subject must not be shared burdens. Now, what does this do for us at the Overlord? Not much. The main reason to build this building is for the +1 loyalty if the subject is egalitarian, which can be nice. But keep in mind that the holdings already come at a price of loyalty. A +1 loyalty means it can keep itself neutral with paying for the 3rd holding slot, which costs 1 loyalty per month. This is made even more situational due to the fact that the subject has to be egalitarian for the positive modifier, and there's a negative modifier if the subject is authoritarian. The effects this holding has for the vassal, on the other hand, are quite helpful, providing +10 housing and +6 amenities on the planet, as well as a +100% egalitarian ethics attraction. All of these don't really matter if you are the overlord, which makes this holding very situational and quite mediocre. If you're the vassal, it can also be quite nice if you are already egalitarian and don't feel like building more housing or hollow theaters. After that is the franchise headquarters. To build this, you must be a megacorp with the franchising civic, and you must have opened a branch office on the planet. Now, what does this holding do? It provides 2 overlord manager jobs, plus 0.25 unity from clerks, -1 trade value from clerks, and plus 100% ethics attraction to the overlord's fanatic ethic. At first glance, these modifiers seem fine, until you realize a little something. You must have already had a branch office open, which means you're already turning the trade value of the planet into energy. So that -1 trade value per clerk hurts you more than the plus 0.25 unity helps. this holding is even worse if the subject is another player, because they're already deprioritizing clerks as much as they can, because clerk jobs kind of suck. Now, as for the Overlord manager jobs, they provide 0.25 unity for the Overlord, and 4 unity and 1 trade value for the subject. The job is not the best job you can be giving your vassal. Now, don't get me wrong, you can have a vast overabundance of energy credits as a megacorp, and so that -1 trade value from clerks, you probably won't care all that much. However, you must consider the fact that clerks only provide plus 0.25 unity for the Overlord, and so that means you need 4 clerks for 1 unity, or basically you're trying to get 40 clerks for 10 unity, which is the base of what some of the other holdings provide with 1 job and with no downside. However, if the planet has more than 40 jobs being worked, it would be advantageous to build this in terms of pure unity production compared to the other holdings available to you. And even if this is one of the best unity producing holdings you could build, it consumes 0.5 loyalty for 10 unity, or whatever, how many clerks you have on the planet, which isn't really all that much, as by the time you're able to comfortably build one of these, you are probably already producing more unity from your own jobs, which only further solidifies its place in the C tier. Now, beside that, you'll see the Orbital Assembly Complex. Now, what does the Orbital Assembly Complex do? It provides 10% planetary build speed on the planet, and increases this planetary build speed by 10% per Overlord construction ship in orbit of the planet, and adds plus 3 alloys per month per construction ship. Now, it must be noted that due to the fact that the production is not produced by a job, the production of the holding is not increased by extra pop resource modifiers, and plus 9 alloys is relatively mediocre and not very useful in the vast majority of cases, especially comparing to, once again, the Ministry of Extraction. And the final point which solidifies its mediocrity is the fact that it costs -10 minerals as an upkeep, meaning that you are spending 10 minerals for 9 alloys, which isn't a bad conversion ratio by itself. However, not only are there better holdings out there to give you alloys, there are also very few cases where I'd go, oh hey, I need plus 9 alloys per month, and that's what's going to get me so much farther. Except in the very, very early game, where your construction ships are actually quite valuable, and where you probably won't have a vassal to put this holding on. Moving on to yet another civic locked holding, we have the Ranger Lodge. Now, to build the Ranger Lodge, we need a few things. The environmentalist civic, a free district on the planet, and the planet must be natural. So no habitats, ring worlds, Q-Monopoly, or machine worlds, or hive worlds. You get the idea. So what does it do? It makes a blocker, reducing the amount of districts on the planet, and provides 1 Overlord Ranger job. The Overlord Ranger job provides 10 unity for the Overlord at base, and reduces pop consumer goods upkeep on the planet by 10%. 10 unity is pretty mediocre, but it's more than what some other holdings might make instead. But despite that, it still isn't very useful due to the fact that plus 10 base unity, or perhaps even 20 unity after you apply certain modifiers as the AI may or may not have, it's still very underwhelming considering the production, except maybe if you're in the early game and are struggling with unity. Moving on to the second origin locked holding we've discussed today, we have the Tree of Life sapling. So this requires you to have the Tree of Life origin, and for the subject to not have the Tree of Life origin, as well as the subject to not be a machine empire, because machine empires don't know the greatness of the Tree of Life. Well, what does the holding do? It provides plus 10% planet habitability, adds 1 food to farmer jobs at base, and provides plus 1 Overlord arborist jobs. Furthermore, it provides plus 1 loyalty for the Overlord. The Overlord arborist job consumes 10 food from the subject and provides 15 food for the Overlord. A nice bonus, but somewhat mediocre depending on the situation. It'll help get pops off of your farmer jobs for you, or help you build alloys if you're using the catalytic processing civic, but that's about it. Besides that, all the bonuses go to the subject, which isn't really a big idea, and even then, to the subject, 10% habitability is comparable to a situational 5% resources from jobs, and the plus 1 food to farmer jobs is not very useful because generally speaking, people don't really want to be working farmers in the first place. And now, finishing the C tier, we have the Vigil command. To build this, the subject must be a bulwark, and it must be built on the Empire capital. This holding generates an Overlord Beholder job, which can produce either 1, 2, or 4 defense platform cap for the Overlord depending on the level of the bulwark, at the cost of only 2 alloys for the subject. Now, defense platform was recently buffed to be much better with extra range and hull points, as well as a variety of other bonuses. However, having only a maximum of plus 4 for this one holding slot and being only able to build 1 because you can only build it on the Empire capital, this holding ends up being a little underwhelming with the fact that as an Overlord you've probably already invested heavily into your fleet to increase your fleet power, and the fact that those extra 4 defense platforms probably won't make a big difference. If we could build multiple per bulwark, I would say you could push this up into the B tier. But the only situation where I think you would ever need to build this holding is if you both had a large quantity of bulwarks and had a moderate obsession with defense platforms. We are now finished with the C tier and will soon move on to the B tier. But first I must follow standard YouTuber protocol and ask, have you been enjoying this video? If so, you could hit the like button, or if you have not been enjoying it, you could hit the dislike. Alternatively, if you have any comments or ideas you would like to discuss with either me or others, either related to this video or related to what I should make for future videos, you can leave them down in the comments below. We have now reached the B tier. In this tier, we have holdings which can either hold their ground and be deemed generally useful, or we have holdings which are still niche, but much more powerful in said niche. And starting us off, we have the Satellite Campus. The Satellite Campus provides 2 Overlord academic jobs, which provide 3 research in all categories to the Overlord, and 1 research in all categories to the subject. Depending on your difficulty modifier, this can allow for some pretty nice research output from the subject, especially in the early game. But of course, this output doesn't exactly scale, and later on in the game, that plus 6 base research won't really help you out all that greatly after you have hundreds of research in each section, or maybe even more. But despite this holding provides enough research to deem itself generally useful, and be better than some of the alternative holdings we have in this tier list. Next, we have the Emporium. Simply needing you to not be just out as an Overlord, it provides 2 Overlord trader jobs and has an extra upkeep of 5 consumer goods. So what do these Overlord trader jobs do? Well, they produce 7 energy credits for the Overlord and 10 amenities for the subject. And this 7 energy credit base production is not horrible considering the circumstances, and can certainly come in useful. And the plus 10 amenities for the subject can make this pretty useful if you're trying to play a co-op game with either you or your friend as the vassal. But generally speaking, I would say that this holding is only good during the early, maybe mid-game, because of the fact that the total 14 energy credit base production isn't all that great once you get into the mid-game and have a lot of either your own technicians or merchants, which can provide much more energy than what the Overlord trader jobs can produce. However, its production is great enough and useful enough that I would say this deserves a place in the B tier. Now we move on to one of the holdings which anyone can build, the Aid Agency. The Aid Agency has an extra upkeep of either 10 food, minerals, or energy if the subject is biological, lithoid, or robotic, respectively. The Aid Agency provides 2 aid worker jobs, which provide 5 unity each for the Overlord and 5 amenities for the subject. Now you may notice that for the Overlord, this effect is very similar to the Ranger Lodge, which got shunted in C tier. So what makes the Aid Agency so much better than the Ranger Lodge? There is one main reason for this, and it's the fact that the Aid Agency also provides an extra 0.5 loyalty per month. Generally speaking, you won't really be using holdings for Unity beyond the early game, and so the fact that the Aid Agency also provides loyalty means that it can better scale into the later game, as loyalty is not something that is inflated as it's continuous, generally speaking, throughout the entire game. However, it should be noted that you cannot build an Aid Agency if you're xenophobic or if you're genocidal, if you're genocidal, the only way to get a vassal is through the Become the Crisis Ascension perk. Moving to another machine exclusive holding, we have the Organic Haven. Exclusive to Rogue servitors, this holding has an upkeep of 10 consumer goods, and a little different to the other holdings, it does not cost any minerals to build. It provides plus 0.5 loyalty to non-Gestalt empires and can't be built in machine intelligence empires because apparently robots can't be pampered. The Overlord receives a base of 3 unity per biotrophy, so this is identical to your regular biotrophy's unity output. And the holding provides 5 Overlord biotrophy jobs. This brings the total base output of this holding to 15 unity if the empire it's built on is not Gestalt. However, if your subject is a Gestalt empire, each biotrophy only produces 2 unity per job instead of 3, which brings it to a base total of 10, which is the same as Aid Agency. And the loyalty modifier does not apply for Gestalt empires. So in the case of Gestalt empires, you are better off building an Aid Agency. As for the subject, each Overlord biotrophy job provides the subject, if it is not Gestalt, with 2 unity and plus 1 planetary happiness. If the subject is Gestalt, the Overlord biotrophies only produce 1 unity per, which is really bad from the subject's perspective. And as for the extra happiness you get as a non-Gestalt empire, plus 5% happiness isn't really all that important, and I mean, the Overlord biotrophies will also be getting plus 40% pop happiness, which is quite nice, but it's not very useful because the Overlord biotrophy is a worker job, which generally speaking won't have very much political power. It's not like the default biotrophy's 1000% political power to instantly bring pop happiness to 80-90%. It doesn't do that. Only plus 5% to that planet total, because it's 1% per Overlord biotrophy, and whatever 5 plus 40% happiness worker pops will give you. Now, its unity production is quite nice, but similar to the Aid Agency and Ranger Lodge before it, the unity production doesn't exactly scale very well, and as a rogue servitor, you're probably going to have hundreds of biotrophies by the mid-game producing unity for you, and so an extra 5 from other vassals and whatever they provide you is generally not going to be as useful as As Rogue Servitor, you're generally already overflowing in Unity anyways, which is why, despite the extra Unity production from this compared to the 8 Agency and Ranger Lodge, it's still in here in the C tier, and also it doesn't produce the same amount of Unity if the Empire is a hive mind. So I guess hive minds just don't care about being pampered by Rogue Servitors, which is just a shame. They would make great bio trophies, you know? But continuing with the positive trend, we have the Gaia Seeders Outpost, requiring the idyllic Bloom Civic, which allows you to make Gaia worlds with buildings. The holding has a total upkeep of 30 energy and 2 exotic gases. Quite expensive compared to most other holdings, and requires 200 exotic gases to be built and 1500 energy to build. So what brings it up here into the B tier? Well, it's the main reason why you'd build a holding in the first place. The fact that it turns the world into a Gaia world after 10 years, and until then it provides plus 20% planetary habitability. Furthermore, it provides an extra +1 loyalty if the subject is not hydrocentric, for obvious reasons, mainly because if you're hydrocentric, ocean worlds are preferable to Gaia anyways. However, generally speaking, most empires greatly appreciate getting Gaia worlds, and if you're doing a co-op game especially, this can be quite useful, as well as if you're preparing a subject for integration and you want some extra Gaia worlds from them. The final holding in the B tier here, we have the Recruitment Office. The Recruitment Office requires the Citizen Service Civic on the Overlord to build, and it provides 2 Overlord recruiter jobs. For obvious reasons, this holding provides a -0.5 loyalty modifier if the subject has the pacifist ethic. Now, these jobs provide 3 armies for the vassal, and for you, the Overlord, each job has a 20% chance to migrate from the subject to you, the Overlord, if the species has citizen rights in your empire. But I hear you. You're wondering why something that gives the Overlord pops is down so low in the B tier. Well, it's because of the fact that it's inconsistent, with each job only providing a 20% chance for the species to migrate. Now, of course, this holding is not locked to the capital, meaning you can build 4 on 1 vassal. However, there's generally better things to do than having a 20% chance to get a pop per job every 5 years, and so this holding unfortunately remains down in the B tier. Now we're moving on to the A tier, which contains holdings that are very useful, and you will probably want to build these at some point onto your vassals. Starting us off, we have the Sacrificial Shrine, which requires the Death Cult Civic and for the subject to not be a machine intelligence. I'm not sure why Paradox added this. I'm sure the machine casings would have been just as effective in sacrificing as any old biological pop, or even better than regular pops, because machines are better at everything. But let's see what it does. This holding has a -0.5 loyalty effect if the subject is not a spiritualist, and it provides 2 Overlord Mortal Initiate jobs, which enables you to use your vassal's pops to empower your empire through sacrificial edicts, as these pops are also consumed when you activate your sacrificial edicts, which can provide some pretty useful boons for the early and mid game. However, of course, by the late game, sacrificial edicts sort of fall off, and so does the effectiveness of this holding. At the end of the A tier, we have the Ministry of Production. The Ministry of Production has a -0.5 loyalty modifier on non-Gestalt empires and a -0.25 loyalty modifier on Gestalt empires. This holding requires the advanced food processing technology before you can build it, and it decreases the production of the subjects, farmers, and artisans by 3 food and 2 consumer goods respectively. However, it makes each farmer and artisan on the planet provide 4 food and 4 consumer goods for the Overlord. Now, some of you may have noticed that 3 is greater than 2, and so is 4. So this holding actually increases the net production of pops, which can be useful in certain co-op games, but you're generally just going to use this to steal resources from your vassal. Of course, for artisan jobs, the ministry increases the upkeep of the job respective to the increase in production. So +2 consumer goods also has a +2 mineral upkeep per artisan, but this just keeps things even with how much the artisans produce. However, this holding does not get the S tier because it only siphons food and consumer goods, and while it can provide you with a large quantity of food and consumer goods, what it basically ends up doing is allowing you to work much fewer farmer jobs and artisan jobs yourself. So that is the primary benefit and the reason why it stays out of the S tier. Now, moving on to the S tier, we have holdings which are very useful in adding to your own resource production or in acquiring a significant portion of loyalty from your subject. So let's get right into it, shall we? For starters, we have a personal favorite of mine, the Ministry of Extraction, requiring the advanced mineral purification technology. This is similar to the Ministry of Production, except instead of with food and consumer goods, it's with minerals and alloys. Much more useful. The exact modifiers this holding uses is it reduces minerals from miners by 2 and alloys from metallurgists by 1, but it adds 3 minerals from miners for the Overlord and 2 alloys for the Overlord as well from each miner and metallurgist respectively. And of course, mineral upkeep is also increased by 2 per metallurgist to ensure that you don't just print alloys from nothing. However, due to the fact that it makes each metallurgist produce a base of 2 alloys for the Overlord per, you only need 3 metallurgist jobs to produce the same amount as the off-world foundry would, or 4 if the subject is machine intelligence. And even better, it only has a -0.5 loyalty modifier instead of a -1.5 loyalty modifier, which the off-world foundry has. Certainly one of the better holdings if you can put it on a planet which has a lot of miners and or metallurgists. Next up, we have the Ministry of Energy, requiring the planetary power grid tech. It reduces the production of technicians for the subject and increases the production of technicians for the Overlord. Specifically, it reduces the production for the subject by 3 and increases the production for the Overlord by 4. It has a -0.25 loyalty modifier, probably due to the fact that it has no associated advanced resources which it siphons. Now, one of the best population reducing holdings we have the Splinter Hive. Requiring the Overlord to be a hive mind and for there to be a free district on the planet, this holding provides 1 Overlord breeder job and makes 1 blocker on the planet. Now what this does is it provides 2 pop assembly on the hive's capital. It's just straight up pop assembly. It's great. And it's not limited to capital planets or anything, so you can make 4 of these in 1 subject and get +8 pop assembly with 1 vassal. Now of course you probably won't do this for a few reasons. First off, the fact that the holding has a very high -2 loyalty modifier, which will sting greatly, as you'll have to either give a lot of subject rights or you're gonna have to provide the subject with subsidies to make up for the massive loyalty penalty you'll be suffering from. But of course, there's plenty of other things you can do with holding slots, so you don't need to only build splinter hives. Now, this one is something you will probably build on all of your vassals with at least 1 copy of it, which is the Overlord Garrison. Not for any production for yourself, no, it only reduces crime for the subject and happiness respectively. However, it provides a base plus 0.5 loyalty, and this can be increased by landing armies onto the planet to a maximum of plus 2 loyalty when you've landed 3 armies. This holding is a great method of increasing your subject's loyalty to allow you to ask for either greater taxes or more holdings. Next up, we have the Ministry of Science, which requires your vassal to be a stellarium, and it can only be built on their capital world. So what does it do? It provides a base 3% research speed at a base and has a -1 loyalty base. However, this can be increased by adding science ships over the vassal's planet, increasing the research by 3% each time, and increasing the negative loyalty modifier by 0.5 each time. It makes quite the dent in your loyalty, capping out at -2.5 loyalty. However, it's well worth the plus 12% research speed you can get from it. And finishing us off, the final holding which we'll examine, we have the Ministry of Truth. Now what does it do? It provides 2 Overlord propagandist jobs. Overlord propagandist jobs produce a base of 0.15 influence for the Overlord at the cost of 1 unity for the subject. As an Overlord, you're going to do a lot of contract negotiations, which requires influence. This building, being one of the few methods of getting influence, is really valuable because it's quite difficult to increase your influence production through other methods. And that's the tier list completed, from F to S tier. Now what do you think of these rankings? Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you have any thoughts or comments about this tier list, you can simply leave them in the comment section below and explain to me why I'm completely wrong and everything I said is completely and utterly deranged. This is one of my first videos detailing things in Stellaris. If you would like to see more of this or other things, you can also leave that in the comments below. So thank you for your time and have a nice day.